Hello, everybody. This is your host, Mason, aka Mace Chill.
And I'm Wyatt Ross, aka Nothing.
So, welcome to a very special episode of what I'm hoping will be a very special type of show on our channel. It's our first podcast. Now, if you're an audio listener, then you're probably listening to this on Spotify, hopefully. So, maybe
iTunes, if we could ever aspire to be that high.
True that. Either way, I don't think there's actually a system on Spotify to comment. So if you want to comment, then feel free to email me. My email is chillmace@gmail.com. I know, very original. And if you're doing this, because most likely this will go onto YouTube first, this is a new thing we're trying. The purpose of this podcast is to go over fictional worlds, and any fictional world really, whether it's games, movies, books, all of it. We're gonna go over all of them, from Tolkien to Doctor Who. We're just gonna go over them all because
Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, Dr. Seuss. Hey, we might on
we very much on a bad day when we're just absolutely struggling to find some new world to peer into. We'll go into Dr. Seuss.
It'll probably be like an April Fool's thing.
So today we'll be talking about the wide world of Dr. Seuss.
But not today. Today we will.
But not today.
We will be talking about the wizarding world of Harry Potter. This is Chill Sages, delivering you funny commentary on fiction with your hosts Mace Chill and Plague 987. If you would like to contact us, please do it at chillmace@gmail.com. All right. So the stuff we'll be going over are, so we'll try, since this is the first video, we're gonna try to condense it all into this video. So naturally, when we go on to heavier stuff, it'll, there'll be more parts following along with that video, so we can do it justice. But we'll condense this one and try to get the main points. So we're going to be talking about some of, prophecies, because those are a big part of the wizarding world. We're going to be talking about the characters, special events, magic systems,
and of course the type of okay.
Oh, sorry.
I was about to say magic system.
Sorry, Wyatt.
Because I want to feel like I'm included in this, man.
You're definitely included. Actually, I'm going to
it's just gonna be you talking for the next half hour. Or no, not half hour. It's gonna be you talking for the next hour, and I'm just kind of sitting here in the corner, just.
No, you'll talk, but I'll listen to you, and then I'll just record over you with my voice, and I'll be talking to myself.
I would no longer welcome myself onto your show.
He'd no longer welcome himself. That's something people say. Tell us about the quotidian life of the sort of it's quotidian. Of the duality that is.
I doubt you even know what quotidian means.
It means the day to day.
Okay. You must have just looked it up for the show, huh?
No, I learned it in my theater class, actually. But
typical theater student, I gotta tell you.
But yeah, tell us about the day to day life that is the kind of duality of one side of the wizarding world / the Muggle world, which is, or the mundane non-magical world, for those who may not know.
So in J.K. Rowling's world, there is a split between two kinds of people. There's wizards and Muggles. For wizards, they live pretty secluded to themselves through magic or literal distance away from Muggles. And Muggles being just regular people. At least in England, they call them Muggles. In America, they call them just No-Mages. And No-Mages rarely have an inkling that wizards actually do exist. They mostly exist in just folklore and the backs of the minds of everyone. In Halloween, at least. And wizards, they try to they try to live among themselves, enjoy their magic, and just try to live normal lives like muggles often do, but they don't interact with the muggles due to certain laws and um, just wanting to avoid things that may have happened before, such as like the Salem witch trials and stuff like that, where muggles often didn't react very well to wizards. And in this one one time span between, I believe, like 1980s, I think it started. Am I right?
What are you talking about? You just started talking
For the Harry Potter plot line.
Oh yeah.
1980s. Okay. And in the 1980s, there was set off one of the biggest events in the wizarding world ever to be seen by both Muggle and man, or both. It was one of the biggest events to be seen by both wizard and Muggle.
All right. Actually, I would interject saying that I believe that event actually would have taken place, at least from what we see in movies, a lot earlier, back in the I believe it's like the 1920s, back when Newt Scamander was walking around in his visit to New York, because when that took place, that was almost a breach between the magical world and the non-magical world, because what we see in the movies and read in the screenplay, because I have this because I like stuff like that, we see, you know, the actual exposure of it, and we have I believe it's the mayor's son, you know, working with well-known witch hunting I want to say cult, but just a witch hunting family, kind of, which is its own type of lore,
like a movement, more or less.
Yeah, it's kind of like
witch
a
hunting movement that mainly involved his family.
Yeah, which and it kind of, you know, so magic kind of got out, and thanks to Newt Scamander through the uses of his beast and an oblivious sort of potion, which is sort of like a mind erasing type potion. Think Men in Black. Thanks to that, there was no big thanks to that, it was reversed, and you know, nobody
just
really
liquid
remembered.
Neuralizer.
Yeah,
it was literally just liquid neuralizer.
Liquid neuralizer, otherwise known as alcohol. Speaking of events,
oh, but you say that in Newt Scamander's case that there was almost a breach between the wizarding world and the Muggle world, and that would be considered a bigger event than what would follow, which is in the more the 1980s.
well,
But
yeah,
I would say that what happened later on was bigger because there was a breach, and there was a breach that basically changed the world.
well, not really. In fact, what happened, because we got to remember, in the only places that was really affected by the things that were happening in the 1980s was really Europe, northern or Western Europe. Like in every, like, you know, America didn't have a Voldemort problem. You know, Brazil didn't have a Voldemort problem. Paris, I believe, did, but again, that's mainly a part of Western Europe. It's but
So you're saying, oh, Europe doesn't matter. We can lose Europe anytime, any day.
But yeah, so because it has Dumbledore. But Fantastic Beasts.
Not anymore.
But yeah, not anymore. But Fantastic Beasts, rather, we see a sort of international. Well, you know, that's World War I, World War II time, World War II era, and we actually see, you know, with Grindelwald and all that, he, like, you know, he causes the world to kind of go into disarray. You know, he causes worldwide chaos, a worldwide movement of dark wizards. And in the movies, he's been to America, he's been to Paris, and in the next movie, he's going into Brazil. So he's going back over to the Americas. So it's, you know, he's doing things that are affecting everybody on a global scale. And he's using, from what we see, I believe he's going to try to use the mask, or maybe even initiate World War II because of just what we've seen, in order to kind of further his goals. So yeah, I would still say that.
And what would you say? What would you say that Grindelwald's goals were?
Well, his goals are evident. He says it all the time. I don't know if this is maybe a classic case of misdirection, but so far his goals are seem to be he wants to subjugate non-magical people.
Subjugation of non-magical. That does kind of coincide with what World War II was.
Yes, the subjugating of non-magical people, the Jews. The least magical people of all. But hey, I think one could make a case about those, but I'm not gonna be that one because I really don't want to delve into World War II politics. But yeah, so yeah, I would argue that Fantastic Beasts still tells just a bigger, wider scale. I mean, because again, Voldemort's bad, and I'd say yeah, he's definitely badder than Grindelwald.
Yes, that is word.
He just does, but he just doesn't do it. He's just not as much as a global threat. I could really see people.
It just didn't reach his hand. Voldemort just. I can see what you're saying.
He stayed too
Voldemort
close to
didn't
home.
really reach his hand. Yeah, he didn't reach his hand out far enough. I think it's because the reason Voldemort stayed at home, stayed more close to home, was because his problem was closer to home. Like the main problem to his power was closer to home, which was Dumbledore.
And that's
And
also true.
he knew he needed to get rid of that first before he'd be able to do anything else.
Well, we also got to remember, and this is one of the things I think is more of a outside step approach, but sometimes that is the only answer. We don't really have, other than some Pottermore, well, which are now Wizarding World passages and certain articles or whatever, we don't really have a number of, information of what took place surrounding what Voldemort really did, other than what we see in the books, and beyond that, we don't hear really anything that would occur after the Tale of Harry Potter. All of what we get is typically either right before or further in the past, and so it could be very well that there were multiple countries affected by it, but we wouldn't know. And I feel like someone could, just as well make an argument, like let's say they go to America and it's like, oh, well, yeah, we thought he was a big threat, but then one day he just stopped. Someone defeated him. They might not even know about who Harry Potter really is, because, I doubt that, but because, Dumbledore was well known everywhere. So
all right, so all we've been doing right now is just looking at like the broad scale of what these antagonists have been doing in the earlier half of the 20th century and the latter half of the 20th century. Let's go into what made Grindelwald, which was the Fantastic Beasts antagonist.
So what made Grindelwald? Well, we know that Grindelwald started out in Durmstrang, which was, it's sort of like, I believe it's the Russian, but I believe it's sort of like the Russian Academy for Magic. I don't want to.
I think you're right. It's either Russia or I think it may have been Middle East.
It's like Bulgarian or something like that.
It?
Yeah, it's something like that. And what is it? Now it's not like one of those dark magic schools, though it is very often seen like that, just because some of their morals and all that at the school are a bit looser, and mainly it's because of the headmaster, who was himself a former Death Eater, which were the posse of Voldemort. But before then, it was just a school like any other, really. And Grindelwald was one of the attendees. Of course, due to certain actions he did at school, some that are explained, like he vandalized part of property, and other actions which are more implied and a bit darker. he was eventually expelled, and so he went back to live with with his aunt, I believe, his great aunt or his aunt, in Godric's Hollow, which happens to be the place where Dumbledore is from. And him and Dumbledore grow a relationship, and they end up becoming good friends, but their ideals are a bit more, tend to go towards the extremist side, because they both believe that because they have great power, and because wizards in general have great power. Grindelwald sees that though, and he asks, why are we hiding? Why are we in the shadows? We have this great power, and yet we pretty much live under them. We conform everything to their schedules, to hiding, stuff like that, just so they can't see us. So he's thinking, we have the power. We're able to, we could do some real good, but of course, we can only do real good if we're in charge, because he also believes in the...
So would you say then that Grindelwald and Dumbledore are kind of mirror each other? Just one goes deviates in one direction while the other deviates in the other direction.
Well, no, because for a long time they're the exact same. Dumbledore believes exactly what Grindelwald believes, pretty much, and so they're doing the exact same. It isn't until the death of Dumbledore's sister, Ariana, which, we don't really know who really caused it, but Dumbledore blames himself. It isn't until that Dumbledore starts seeing a bit more respect for those who may not be as powerful. At least what I think. He doesn't go into full detail about it, but I believe it can be surmised from the fact that, up until that point, he's perfectly fine with doing whatever. Then suddenly Ariana, who is sort of magically, what would be the right word? Magically, oh man, I'm really challenged. There it is. Magically challenged.
Okay. I was about to say challenged, but I didn't know if that's what you were going for.
Yeah, magically challenged. Not in that she can't do magic, but that it's sort of, she's scared of it for, for reasons of her past. She doesn't use magic. And because of that, it was kind of the reason why it was so easy for a fight, when a fight broke out between Dumbledore, Grindelwald, and Dumbledore's brother, Aberforth, she died. And so now we're not really sure. It doesn't really give huge specifications about how she died in the text. It just says like something happened. Some people say it agitated her, like just her powers, and it caused her to just kind of melt down. We see more about that in the Obscurus that is talked about in Fantastic Beasts. So that might have been a thing. It might have killed her, because we know it has the power to do that. Some people say a spell flew and hit her. It could be anything, but what we know is she died, and Dumbledore took it to heart. And so what he ended up doing was, I think, he really started taking a value to people who just are not as powerful as he is. And so that's really when the deviation came about, and he started
So that's what I was saying is like, I wasn't saying like at that time, I was saying in general.
Oh, yeah.
Was Dumbledore and Grindelwald both very similar? Now, when we say this, we could safely assume that they were both zealots for like wizardry at the time.
Yeah.
Would you describe them as zealots?
At the time, I guess I would describe some of their ideas as a bit zealot extremists. They were definitely far on their side at the time, and it was.
And so what spurred on Grindelwald to finally just try to go after Muggles?
Well, he'd always been doing it, but the thing is, Grindelwald, and we're seeing this play out now. So this is really what's going to cause it to be. I think we're going to go deeper in the next movie, but Grindelwald was a bit smarter than Voldemort. Grindelwald was a master of subtlety. He and Voldemort was already pretty subtle, but in his point, that part of his plan was to make sure that nobody knew of his return. Sort of the greatest trick that the devil ever played was that he didn't exist at all. And so, which is played on heavily in, I believe it is the Order of the Phoenix. Yeah. But Grindelwald he's using the last part of the 1800s and the first part of the 1900s to really set up like his plan, his order, all that. And we really see it come to fruition in this last movie in Paris, because he's talking in that mausoleum and he's got thousands of British wizards just sitting around. And he's smart. It's not like, he's outwardly breaking the law, because when the cops come in and try to apprehend him, they can't do anything. He's got them in a position where they can't really do anything, because the moment they shoot a spell or do anything and they then start provoking him, in which case what he does in a retaliation is not illegal. And so though they're trying, so it's kind of how, he knows the law. He fully knows what he's doing. So it makes sense why it's kind of taken so long for him to go from like talking about it to up there, because he's covering his bases.
Now we see his first the first real resistance to him, and the first real atrocities that he committed. For a majority of his life, he had committed atrocities such as killing Muggles, right?
That, so far as I've seen, is unclear. It's unclear up until recently, before the Fantastic Beasts movies.
Okay, exactly, and that's what I was trying to get at, is we really start seeing like the brunt of his power what was his name again?
Who? Newt?
The protagonist, Newt Scamander. Okay, we saw a brunt of his powers when Newt Scamander into the picture. And Newt Scamander in the Fantastic Beasts, in just the general story arc of the Fantastic Beasts, was to plainly put it, a wizarding zoologist.
He's a magizoologist.
And he spent a majority of his life not only studying magical creatures, he also spent a large time protecting those in which most deemed unsafe and were hunted very, very fervently by those who didn't like them. And their stories finally clash when Newt Scamander runs in New York. Yeah.
Yes. From what we're led to believe, it was not of his own kind of will. It was pretty much due to the interference of Dumbledore.
Excuse me. So he was brought into New York by Dumbledore.
Yes, he learned of he says this in the first movie. He learned of a specific type of creature that was being bred in New York, or it might have been New York. It was being bred in America, and from what he says in the second movie, he comes over and he says, "I know." He talks to Dumbledore. He's like, "I know you sent me that information about this creature trying to get me to New York on purpose." And we see that.
I guess that would make sense. That would make sense, because when he went into New York, and when he tried to find this breeder of this specific, when he tried to find the breeder of this specific creature, he was only apprehended by the police because breeding magical creatures in America is illegal.
Yeah, well, that is why he was captured, because that's exactly what Porpentina told him.
And that's what led Scamander to believe that Dumbledore was leading him in. And
well, it was more
do you
so
think this was?
I believe it was more so of the fact that, he's there, and it just so happens that Grindelwald, who is a well-known adversary of Dumbledore, also happens to be there. I mean, I would assume that something happened. There's a whole lot of stuff that happens, because even the Ministry is in the second movie questions Newt Scamander, believing that he is in cahoots with Dumbledore. Newt's the only one who doesn't believe that he's in cohorts with Dumbledore, and even he falls in line at the end of the second movie.
So for the majority of it, Newt's like, I don't really mess with Dumbledore all that much.
Well, he doesn't
And like
want to.
everyone's like, yes you do, yes you do.
Well, yeah, he doesn't want to pick a side in this whole thing.
I guess that's because like the zealots of the wizarding world, and those who fervently believe that that wizards should coexist with muggles. I guess that was kind of a building rift between them at the time. Yeah.
Well, it's always been sort of a rift since the sort of institute that they would have to be separate. But yeah, there's definitely a rift between people who are hardcore wizarding zealots that believe they should rule, and people who are fond of the peaceful but secret coexistence with them. Those are drawing lines in the sand. And Newt wants no part really in this whole power struggle. He just kind of wants to be left alone to do his research.
But Dumbledore's leading him into New York kind of forced him to take a side.
And we see, and a lot of people have talked about this, so I think I want to go into characters right now because I kind of want to streamline this. So we see Dumbledore do this a lot, especially in the most noted cases are in the Harry Potter books, where Harry kind of doesn't want to be a part of this whole struggle. He kind of wants to because at the beginning of the books we see how bad his life is, because at the beginning of every Harry Potter book up until the last one, we sort of get to see they start off at Privet Drive, where he is just being constantly berated by his aunt and her family. And so we see, when he gets to the wizarding world, he kind of just wants to live as normal as a life that, as any kid could lead, even though he's in the wizarding world. He doesn't want to do all these stuff. He doesn't want to go on all these adventures. He just wants to have a fun, regular life. However, Dumbledore...
With people who seem to actually like love him rather than the secluded, isolated hatred that he felt at Privet Drive, which is where his aunt and uncle imprisoned him.
Exactly. And Dumbledore has the dual intent for Harry that up until he needs Harry to strike, he's going to he's sort of trying to protect Harry from this, because we'll often see, so he often tells Harry, don't do this, don't pursue this, don't go out, virtually the whole don't be a hero because you might die. But then it's almost like contradictory. He'll instruct Harry specifically with information that could only ever cause him to do things that could cause his own death. For example, he delivers the famous speech, "Help will always be offered at Hogwarts for those who need it or want it," depending on which version you listen to. We see him trying to give hints to Harry constantly about more dangerous stuff we can do. We see him around other people who are doing that, because again, he's around Hagrid when Hagrid's being sent to the Chamber of Secrets, and Hagrid tells him, if anybody wants to find anything out about anything, follow the spiders. That's all I'm gonna say. And again, Dumbledore fully knows that Harry and Ron are under the invisibility cloak during that meeting. So it's a bit contradictory. And we don't really find out the extent of his plan into the last book, when we find out that he's virtually been breeding Harry for the moment that he fights Voldemort, which is that's caused a lot of people to sort of dislike Dumbledore, which is understandable, because he but of course I don't hold it, just because logically what Dumbledore did is the best course of action. A lot of people see it as, he's endangering kid, he's doing that, which he is. But but of course, as we see in the prophecy, which we'll discuss later, if the only way to do something is by endangering a kid, most people will take the utilitarian approach. Not saying I always fall in line with that, but most people will take the utilitarian approach and, do it for the greater good, which is another thing that of Dumbledore's past. Because Dumbledore Dumbledore and Grindelwald, a phrase they always used was "for the greater good." and Dumbledore has not really left that. It's a huge theme in Deathly Hallows, which is the last book.
Now, when we're saying this, let's get on to the antagonist that spurred on the necessity of Dumbledore to prepare Harry for,
So
basically a death match.
So Voldemort, who I believe we'll see in the coming Fantastic Beasts movies, Voldemort is called one of the darkest wizards ever. He's said by Hagrid to have gone as bad as a wizard could possibly go. In fact, some people don't even believe it was possible for him to die, which they might have been right, because they don't believe he had enough human in him. And this kind of fits well with
There was basically nothing to die at that point.
And this fits well with sort of the prophecy, because the reason why only Harry could really challenge Voldemort is because, according to a prophecy made by Sybil Trelawney, who is a seer and a professor of divination at Hogwarts, Voldemort would mark a child as his equal, and only they, and it's sort of the way prophecies go in the Harry Potter world is that you get sort of a background. You get up until the event, and then the event can go one of two ways, or one of any the ways that are named. And so what it does in this case is that it talks about how the child will be chosen, what will sort of be the calling card of who this child is, and then finally only one of those two can kill each other. Nobody else will really be able to do it until that battle, which has actually led some people to believe that Harry is now immortal, because they believe they take the language seriously that that only those two people could kill each other. So we don't know. Maybe it's true. I don't hold much water to that, but it's a fun theory.
Now, when looking at the childhood of both Harry and Voldemort, Voldemort, who was also known as Tom Riddle when he was younger, people find a lot of similarities in their growing up. They're both orphaned, and they're both orphaned. They were both isolated very harshly. The only problem is Voldemort took it in the expected way. When you look at it through a psychoanalytic lens, Voldemort took the isolation and the orphan complex that many orphans do get, which is feeling like they were not loved when they were given away.
Well, there are some differences in what you're saying. For example, the isolation that Voldemort felt was pretty self-inflicted.
It wasn't that
what I was about. He wasn't isolated in the way that Harry was.
I was going to bring that up. Voldemort. That's one of the big differences between Harry's and Voldemort's. Voldemort, he acts more along the lines of someone who's been orphaned, which is they kind of isolate themselves, especially when they know they've been orphaned. When they know they've been orphaned, they will often act like this, which is they will isolate themselves. They will feel like they're unloved, and in isolating themselves, they end up making themselves feel worse. Whereas Harry, he didn't know he was orphaned at first.
Yeah.
He was orphaned when he was a baby, whereas Tom Riddle was knowingly given away.
True, but of course Tom also did not really know. He didn't know who gave him away.
True.
So it's still the same. There's also a difference, I believe, and I believe this is said, I'm unsure, it might be said in the Wizarding World, which is currently where a lot of the information on this stuff is held. But I believe Voldemort physically can't, or literally, I guess, cannot feel love due to how he was conceived, which was his mother, who was known as, all I'll put is she was known as Hagrid looking. So if you've seen our Assassin's Creed Let's Play, think Tana or Tona, or however they pronounce
Just think
it.
Tona from Valhalla's Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, but she wasn't good looking. However, she saw a man whose name was Tom Riddle, who was very attractive. And so, but he was also a muggle. And so what she ends up doing is brewing a love potion that that kind of, did what love potions typically do in any fantasy world. And so, they consummated all of that. They had a child whom she named Tom Riddle as well. So Tom Riddle Jr., which would later become Voldemort. And then she decided, because out of I think this was while she was pregnant, she decided out of a real love for him that she would no longer keep him under the enchantment of a love potion. So she dispelled it, and he immediately broke up with her, which is, only natural when you've been sort of hoodwinked into it. So no one places the blame on Tom Riddle Sr. in this case.
You've just been put into basically a trance to love this one very unattractive looking woman, and conventionally unattractive looking woman. And
there were no conventions about that. She'd scare them all away.
When I first come out of that trance, I'm not going to be like, oh, I'm going to stay with this lady. No, I'm getting out of there.
Exactly. And so, yeah, she ends up having the kid anyway, and ends up giving it away to an orphanage, which is
to the chagrin of her family as well, because her family were very well-known purists. Or in other words, they wanted to keep.
We'll talk about their family in a second. I want to finish up with Voldemort. So yeah, Voldemort is given away to an orphanage, but he is what's known as sort of an heir of Slytherin. Slytherin being not only one of the Hogwarts houses, but the name of one of the founding members of Hogwarts, and he's one of the heirs. Very powerful family blood, very powerful family line. And even Voldemort, who is a half-blood, that means he's half magical, like half magical line, half muggle line. Even he shows extreme and great power, and the ability of Parseltongue, which is the ability to speak to snakes, or to speak the snake language. And so he sort of, he discovers his magic in a completely different way than typical wizarding youths. Dumbledore describes that he actually sort of knew that he was able to do magic, and he had been experimenting with it. He had been using it to get what he wanted, virtually as if he had already had some lessons on it. So it was unprecedented. So Dumbledore knew from the beginning he was going to be great. But when he, especially upon meeting him, he just didn't know exactly the meaning of his greatness. And so, which is alluded to by Ollivander. And so, yeah, essentially then what takes place is is he forms a band of Death Eaters while at Hogwarts. Then
what he coined to be Death Eaters, which is basically just his followers.
They were his cronies. And then he Exactly. He springs kind of a reign of terror up until around the 1980s, which marks the birth of Harry Potter. Voldemort marks him as his equal, and then disappears due to a force which we'll describe later. And then Voldemort ends up. Then the Harry Potter books happen. He dies in the final one, and after all of his Horcruxes are destroyed, which again we'll talk about later, and the Wizarding World is saved for what is perceived to be the final time, it would seem. And so yeah, another character I want to go on to real quick, because she also kind of plays into the Harry Potter world, the Harry Potter part of the Wizarding World greatly, which is Sybil Trelawney, the seer.
Even though her part was very short-lived.
It was, but it was instrumental to everything, because without her, nobody really would have known. We're not quite told the nature of prophecies, whether prophecy has to be told in order to happen, or whether it just happens on its own. So it's just not something we're seeing. But she's a seer. She comes from a family of seers, and she actually, I believe it's her great-grandmother, is Cassandra, which, if any of you know Greek mythology, and I assume you do, because why wouldn't you? Only the coolest people.
Come
do.
on, only peasants would ever not know Greek mythology.
Yes, exactly. Cassandra was the name of a seer that she had a curse on her, and the curse was that she would always be able to predict the future, but no one would believe her. And Professor Trelawney, she siphons that the gift had sort of been out of the family for a while, up until her, she says, in which it is reignited. Now, for most of the time, she's kind of portrayed as sort of, not legit, like just a poser, a fraud. Like she's making it all up typically. Until we find out in some of the books, ever so often, she actually tells a real prophecy. And then we find out that she told Harry Potter's prophecy. And, and which tell us more stuff, which we'll talk about later. And so Snape ends up, when he's working for Voldemort, ends up hearing about said prophecy, understanding the implications of it. He runs off to tell Voldemort, and then runs off to tell Dumbledore after he hears Voldemort's true plans. And so it's a it's a huge thing. She's instrumental, but other than the fact that she's sort of a weirdo and she's a seer, but most of the time she's a fraud. There's not really that much to her. She's definitely a tertiary character.
And it's a very her character is made for one singular purpose, and that was it.
But it was a great purpose, and so a lot of these characters are great, even the minor ones. Speaking of them, I would like to talk about the two other biggest, other than Harry, obviously, would be Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley. I'll talk about Hermione. You can talk about Ron. All right.
Okay.
Okay. So Hermione was actually, you go on with Ron first because I believe he was the first one met. So go on with Ron.
All right. So Ron Weasley was I'm sad to say I kind of relate to Ron Weasley on a personal level because his family oftentimes reminds me a lot of mine, which was his family is very homely, to say it generously. They were all very, very closely at a time. They were all very closely knit. They were all very loving towards each other and just very, very much a family. So there was a lot of love. There was a lot of kids. And it was just the only problem that really was with this family is they were always just kind of tight on money. But as Ron geared up for his first day at Hogwarts, he met Harry Potter. Now Ron, along with his family, despite being very tight on money and stuff, their family was often known. The reason they were often known was because of their very distinct features, which was ginger hair, freckles. And they were all looked very similar to each other, even the mother and the father. But
Sweet Home Alabama.
I'm not implying that. But they were all a very, very happy family despite the lack of money, and
which is already the most fantasy part of that world because no one's happy without money.
Whoa, you cut out there. I cannot hear you. Say it again.
I said I said that's the most fantastical part of Harry Potter, the fact that they're happy without money, because no one is.
Of course no one is, man. You can Harry Potter had
I know.
The second he got in, he had bank, and he was so happy after that.
I know. Anyway, sorry, go on.
But they were poor, but they were happy. Ron's father, he worked at the Ministry, which is basically the wizarding government
in England.
His mother was a stay-at-home mother. She always took care of things around the house. Bill was the one he's a curse breaker who was always kind of out and about, out of the house. Much older. There was a large age gap between him and Ron. There is also Charlie. He dealt a lot with dragons. Somehow kept all of his fingers, no burns. Very lucky guy. Then there was Percy. Percy, he has a much more heavy presence in most of the books. He was known to be a much more uptight guy who always stuck right to the rules, much to the chagrin of most of everyone almost. Then there's Fred and George. They were the two playful older twins of Ron Weasley, and they, as you can see later on in the books, they didn't even finish high school. They immediately went on to start a joke.
Whatever you consider, was it wizarding school? The disastrous school that was, or the disastrous few years that was Harry Potter's education. Well, I'm just saying, like, I wouldn't know if that's called high school or it's primary school.
Yeah, it is primary. It's like primary and secondary
at the same time.
Yeah. Well, school.
Go on.
And they didn't even finish school. They dropped out, went right to starting a business that took off immediately. Which just, absolutely shows you no one actually really needs school.
That's what they say.
That's true. And then there's Ron. He's second youngest. Ron. Which we'll get into in a little bit. He's the typical Weasley, red and ginger hair, lots of freckles, very very boyish.
A boy, and then
a single boy. Then the one girl, which was Ginny Weasley, and she was
Generva, I think is her name.
Her actual name's Generva?
I believe so. Generva.
I like his like six very very normal names. Then Generva.
Bill, Charlie, Percy, Fred, George, Ron, and Generva.
And you could probably just look at how many kids they've had and just understand why they were always tight on money.
Yeah.
Because that's a lot to take care of. But finally, on Ron's when Ron turned 11, he much like Harry Potter went to the first year of Hogwarts, and they both.
So describe Ron.
Ron, you could tell. You could describe him as the typical, not testosterone filled. Well, kind of he was. He was
just a boy. He was a typical boy.
Yeah, typical young boy.
He was everything Harry wanted to be.
Pretty much, even with the entire family, because Harry had a blast with Ron's family.
He did.
And Ron's family very, very sweetly kind of just took him in as another child.
My favorite meme is the one where, what's his name? Arthur Weasley, which is the dad, comes into the house and he looks at all his kids eating, and then he looks at Harry, he's like, who's this one? And the meme's just like, I love how he walks in and his first thought is like, let's see, this one doesn't have orange hair, so he can't be one of mine. Who is he?
just imagine it, because that is kind of true. It's like looking at like a lineup of like little piles of cumin, then one of them just happens to be a peppercorn, and it was like, whoa, who's this one?
That was the straight. You could have said anything. You said cumin and peppercorn. That was awesome.
I mean, because Harry has black hair, doesn't he?
Yeah, I hear you. But yeah.
And they first, where did they first meet again?
They first met in King's Cross on the platform right before they hit platform 9 3/4.
So basically, Ron's family just kind of introduced him to the first wave of the Wizarding World, which was finally actually going to the school. And going to the school involved something that not many people knew how to do, least of all Harry Potter.
Well, not many Muggle-borns knew how to do.
Muggleborns, yeah. Especially with Muggleborns who didn't have any parents that actually, or guardians that actually cared about them.
Yeah. So that's pretty much Ron. He's pretty much just the archetypal boy.
Archetypical, I think is the word.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure they both could be used.
I don't mean to be a grammar Nazi on you.
But yeah, Ginny, by the way, because it wasn't mentioned, is pretty much the I'll just say the typical. It's pretty much the typical what was it? Oh man, I couldn't. Tomboy. Pretty much the typical
That's
tomboy.
true, because she did grow up with a lot of grow up with a lot of brothers, so it kind of makes sense.
Exactly. She had was it like 6 brothers? Yes, she would have 6 brothers, so that's a lot. Then you have Harry's other friend who he met not on the platform, but rather on the train, Hermione Granger. Hermione Granger is our first example in the Wizarding world, or in the first book at least, of what is known as a Muggleborn. So different from a Half-Blood. Half-Blood, as you can assume, like I said, has half Wizarding blood. Muggleborn has 0 Wizarding blood. And
they just happen to be magical out of nowhere.
They happen to be magical. Now there is, I believe, the explanation for this is that somewhere in their line there typically is a wizard, but this wizard is what's known as a squib, which means that they come from magic parents but have no magic of their own. And
kind of what you would call the opposite of a Muggleborn.
Exactly, and they typically they typically leave the Wizarding world, marry into the non-magical world, and then later their offspring produces magical powers. So Hermione Granger's ancestor was probably a wizard, but Hermione is a very intelligent young lady. She very intelligent, but not actually greatly skilled, except for in mental aptitude. But
yeah, she was intelligent, just not really. How do you say? I wouldn't say clever.
She couldn't apply it. She was greatly clever. In fact, she was called by Remus Lupin the cleverest witch of her age, and so or of the age.
Just socially, she wasn't able to apply it. Yeah.
She was very socially awkward. It was hard for her to really use summon. Not to say that she was bad with magic. She was great in it. But she wasn't at Harry's level. And Harry
to sum it up,
she study it.
A know-it-all.
She was a know-it-all, and that's how she was portrayed. And that's how pretty much she was portrayed. And we don't really get a lot of information about her parents other than that they are Muggles. She's, like we said, she's smart. It's typically the classic group of the hero's best friend, and then the smart one in the group that they pretty much rely on throughout all of the stories, because pretty much in every story they wouldn't have survived to the end without her. The first book, I believe it is, she kind of figures out her way through all of the problems, or by problems I mean like all of the trials to get to the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone, depending on if you read the British version. In the Chamber of Secrets, she pretty much figured out what the monster was and how to get to it, and how to kill it even. Was it the 3rd book? She helped Harry find the Prisoner of Azkaban. The 4th book, the 4th book actually she wasn't as helpful, which was great because it really allowed you to see Harry kind of use his own reasoning, which was not half bad. The 5th book, she helped Harry form Dumbledore's army. The 6th book, her and Ron were not as prevalent because it dealt a lot with the relationship between Dumbledore and Harry. And in the final book, she pretty much is instrumental in Harry getting back to Hogwarts and finishing off Voldemort once and for all. And to be honest, she's pretty much been more of a help to Harry than Ron is. However, Ron is undoubtedly Harry's best friend, and he provides the great emotional support. even though he is probably the least emotionally present character, or not, or aware character.
That's just to compliment his boyish nature, because
Yeah, it's typical
not
boy.
most guys don't really know how to just like support emotionally to its fullest extent, but they know how to do it to the point where it feels comfortable.
Yeah. So now we're gonna lightning round some characters just to get finished with that. You have love interest. We're only gonna go over the most important ones and detrimental to the story. You have I was about to call him Devil. You have Neville Longbottom, who is, he's at first given off to be the really cowardly, dumpy sort of character.
Very, very clumsy.
Very clumsy, just all around the antithesis actually of Harry Potter. And the reason why he's shown only not the antithesis, but not antagonist towards him. And it's shown this way because he is seen to be really he was known as the other Harry Potter. He could have been the other boy. Him and Harry Potter have lots in common. In fact, his parents went insane trying to protect Harry and his family. And so it is so it's all tied together. And
which is really traumatic to think about. It's like your parents literally went crazy trying to protect some other family.
True, but that just goes to show how noble they were.
That's true.
And then we see in of course in the final book, in fact in the final like 3 books, we really start to see him really fill out and grow in character and really grow in strength. We get Draco Malfoy, who is, I would say, the mirror of Harry Potter. And it's actually said that this was on purpose, because everything that Harry is good at, Malfoy is bad at, and everything Malfoy is good at, Harry is bad at. For example, Harry's great at Patronuses, Malfoy can't produce one. Malfoy is great at potions, Harry's can't. Excuse me, I'm burping a lot. Harry can't make one. So it's a lot of things. Was it some that come to present are
Harry definitely struggled with the potions.
Exactly. I'm trying to think.
Then again, with Snape being the way that he was, he wasn't doing Harry any favors.
Well, it wasn't just Snape though, because even in when Slughorn came up, he was only good because of Snape. And so
that's true. I never really thought of that. At first, Snape just kind of didn't do him any favors. Then he did do him favors, just very indirectly.
Snape's like alcohol. He's the answer, and he's the beginner and answer to all of life's problems. So yeah, then we have Luna Lovegood. Luna Lovegood, sort of the ditzy. She's actually sort of the antithesis of Hermione. Hermione's very logical, very reasoning, which even I'm like, if I was suddenly told I'm a wizard, there would be nothing I would not believe. I would be the most gullible wizard ever, because I'd be shown in this world, and do you think the first thing I think is, that can't happen?
You think that's why Hermione was always very studied, is because she wanted to make sure that never happened?
Yeah, probably never happened again, because she just had her mind blown. They're wizards. But yeah, and so there's that. Luna Lovegood's very ditzy. She's even for a wizard, she's pretty weird. And so and it's not even one of those things where it's like, oh, she's misconstrued as weird, even though they try to put that forward. No, she is very undoubtedly weird, but it's a very redeeming quality in her because she's very good natured.
Yeah, even though she's like very like kind of floaty in her speech, very, very, her mind's just up in the clouds, and even when it's down from the clouds, it had stories to tell about the clouds. That's the type of weird she was.
Very fun, but
very fun.
But then there is also great boon and friend of Harry. In fact, her knowledge becomes invaluable in the Battle of Hogwarts. So then we go into Snape. Snape's a very detrimental character. A lot of the adult characters are detrimental to the story. Snape specifically, he's the reason Harry was marked as Voldemort's equal, and pretty much marked for death, because when he told what he heard of the prophecy. We know he did not hear the full, the full prophecy because Dumbledore found out that he was listening and blasted him. But when he left, he said what he knew, which pretty much said that, which pretty much noted who condemned Harry, but it could have condemned either of them, either him or either Harry or Neville, if Snape had stayed long enough to hear about it. But for the time being, Voldemort ended up hearing the bit of the prophecy that Snape heard and selected Harry. And so then Snape had a heavy infatuation for, in fact, one might even be able to call it love, depending on what one's definition of love is.
That'd be a very twisted definition of love, if you ask me.
Well, it could be love. It could also be obsession. It really depends. And we can go into that. We can go into that later. But Snape, then turns to Dumbledore as the only wizard who Voldemort is afraid of, and tries to convince him to, save Lily and to save Harry. Well, to save Lily, but as a proxy, also save her family, even though he doesn't really like her family. So yeah, and so Snape throughout all the books is portrayed as pretty much one to look.
Lily?
Lily's Harry's mother.
You didn't specify that earlier.
Yeah, sorry. But Snape's portrayed as typical, like, oh, he's obviously a bad guy. And of course, in all the books, Harry's always suspicious of him. And then usually the plot twist is, oh, Snape's actually been helping him out the entire year. So, a lot of people don't like Snape. I'm going to be honest. This guy spent years, he spent years tormenting kids because of his past, which is kind of a douche thing to do. But he also spent, about 7 years or longer protecting a kid who he hated, even if he hated him unreasonably. So that's still something. It's some redeeming quality. But, and then finally we find it out, finally he kills Dumbledore. Spoiler alert. Don't worry, there will be one at the beginning of this episode, hopefully, if I remember. He kills Dumbledore, so everyone believes, oh, Snape really was a snake. He really was going to betray Dumbledore. And then it's found out to all have been a part of Dumbledore's crazy crackpot plan.
Because at times it really does seem like Dumbledore's on crack most of the time.
It does, but it works out in the end, so it's magical crack. Otherwise
as
known
if crack is never magical.
Otherwise known as cocaine.
But then you have other than Snape, then you have...
He eventually turns out to not be traitor and gives his life for the cause.
But after that, then you have, what's her name? The McGonagall. You have McGonagall, which is their, transformations?
Transfigurations.
The Transfigurations teacher, meaning, how to transform some things into other things. And she's kind of portrayed as a... just like a stern, basically she's the most teacherly of all the teachers at Hogwarts.
Of all the teachers, one can sum up her entire character personally in just the words tough but fair.
Tough but fair teacher, yeah.
She's pretty much tough but fair. Whereas Snape is just tough.
There ain't no fairness about him. He's just tough.
She's one of the big teacher characters. Other than Snape, there aren't many, except for the revolving cast of Defense Against the Dark Arts teachers,
which is in the book. It's noted for being seemingly to be a very cursed
position.
Because
people only last a year.
There's only it's, which oddly kind of reminds me of my baseball coach. It's hilarious because I never knew this until after I got out of high school. It was even before I went into baseball at high school. Every single year, we had a different coach, and it was the most hilarious thing because I read when I was reading Harry Potter. I read there hasn't been a teacher in the Defense Against Dark Arts position for any more than a year. I'm like, Oh, that sounds awfully familiar.
Harry Potter music intensifies.
Exactly.
But yeah,
It's like bass boosted.
then there's then there's oh, what am I thinking?
But by the way, each Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher did the most in complementing the story of each book. Like
Yeah.
each one held a very, very important role in each book.
Yeah, pretty much. But they were able to keep it from getting stale because in the first book, and pretty much a lot of the other ones, the bad guy was the new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. But they did a great job of not letting you expect it because after the first two books, because you have in the first book, you have a downright evil Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher. In the second book, you have just a dumb.
That again?
That was Professor Quirrell.
Oh yeah,
This-
but yeah, you're right. They did their best in making you think he's not evil.
Yeah, and then in the second one, you have one that's not really evil, but he's not a good guy. In the third one, in the third one, you have a great guy. In the fourth one, you think, and you know, because the third one you had such a great guy. In the fourth one, you think you have a great guy, and he turns out to be the bad guy. In the fifth one, you just have the devil herself.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And
the
then
frog devil herself.
And then in the sixth one, you just have in the sixth one, Snape finally gets his way and becomes Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher.
Because it is known by a majority of the school that
He wants that
Snape,
job.
yeah, Snape has always eyed the job of Defense Against the Dark Arts, even though repeatedly Dumbledore had shot him down for it.
Mm-hmm. And finally, I think the last person we should really talk about would be the parents themselves, James and Lily Potter. Their story, and so I won't go into full detail just because it's one of those stories that is really ingrained into the books. Both James and Lily are the typical, they were the hero's family and they would have given him the perfect life. They were great. Of course, we find out that James in his earlier life was a douchebag, but he wasn't like a bad guy. He was like a typical kid. You know, he was.
Oh yeah, true. Bully is a bit stronger than what he was. It was more or less he was
a kid.
Yeah, just a kid. Like if he saw someone funny looking, he'd probably make fun of him for being funny looking.
Yeah, but he was a kid with wizard powers, which
Snape most of the time.
He was a kid with wizard powers, which was the worst combination in the world. But what is it? But then there's Lily, who honestly is the only one throughout the story, which pretty much is never really said to really have any flaws. She was perfect, but it's also great that she wasn't, the main character or any of that. So it kept it still like, it made it a fresh breath of air because she was the only one that was like, oh, Lily was good.
Did you just say fresh of breath air?
Oh. He's a breath of fresh air.
Just a nice fresh of breath air.
She's a breath of fresh air. Sorry. Is it hot in here? Or is it just me? Is it me in here? Or is it just hot?
Keep doing that. We're on a fun podcast here.
She was so she was good, and we actually find out exactly how good she is because when Voldemort goes to kill Harry, she jumps sort of in front of his wand and does something very peculiar, which we will not go over as I want you to read the story yourself. So
we want you to put some work in. We're already putting a lot of work in.
We are, exactly. And so those were the biggest characters you'll need to know about. One thing I would like to bring up are artifacts, because the artifacts are pretty interesting, especially just how enchanting is really pushed up to the next level in Harry Potter. Like in most places, it's like, oh, cool, magical sword. Harry Potter, it takes on a whole new life of its own because it means so many different things. Like one could say that the wands are enchanted, but they're also semi-alive. The wand chooses the wizard.
They're all very reactive.
Semi-sentient. There it is. Yeah, they understand the wizard. They can choose alliances, loyalty, stuff like that. And then there's things like time turners, which can bend the fabric of time. There's little orbs that contain prophecies made by seers. It's, you know, the artifacts in the world are so amazing because
But then you have Horcruxes.
Horcruxes are like isn't I'm trying to even think. It's not even described. There's nothing you can read that even describes I mean, you can read some theories, but there's no official saying of what the process to make a Horcrux even is.
Much like in the book, there is little to no information that anyone could find to understand a Horcrux.
Yeah, the fact that Voldemort found out even how to make a Horcrux is a testament to his knowledge and power. Like, you know, and so
He very well may have just made his own way to make a Horcrux rather than go about any established method.
that may be. Of course, we find out when he asks Slughorn about it, which is one of the potion teachers. When he asks Slughorn about it, he already knows really about it. He's asking Slughorn what are the lasting effects, you know, what could essentially happen. You know, what's the quick words that are exchanged at the end of a medicine commercial? So yeah,
Usually it's just a bunch of warnings.
of course, a lot of
May cause obscene blood farts.
exactly a lot of I gotta look if I'll keep that one in. A lot of people would say, myself included, would ask why he would make his Horcruxes so obvious, and why not like make a grain of rice and throw it in the bottom of the ocean? Because he does not need to go to his Horcrux, nor does he need to be near it in order for it to work. It could be anywhere in the world. As long as it stays intact, he will stay living. So, and he's connected to it. He knows where it is at all time. So you think he'd get a grain of sand and throw it on a beach or something. So like it really is sort of an
When you
oversight.
look at the established Horcruxes in the book, you kind of find it as a trend of things that he has sentimental value with.
I know that's the part I'm criticizing. That is so stupid. It's like, what do you think a Horcrux would be?
No.
Do you think it
That
should be
may-
this random spoon? Or do
Oh,
you think
Mason.
it'll be this thing that's really tied to Voldemort's intricate side? Intricate
What I'm saying
feelings.
is, what if that's one of the requirements for a Horcrux?
And it might be. Again, we don't know. And maybe that is the answer. I mean, it's really easy
It'd be the only logical answer, because if it was just, you know, whatever the heck you found it, then yeah, it was pretty stupid of Snape to make it stuff he had.
This is the critique of J.K. Rowling. It's easy to say that either of those things are true when the only thing you say about it is, oh, it's so evil. But
It's so evil.
it's so evil. But yeah, so
Don't even talk about it. It's so evil.
yeah, so that's one of the more darker artifacts. One more artifact that we have to go over is brooms.
Oh yeah,
But we don't actually have to go over it too much because I'm saying but not just me. You can buy a history of Quidditch, which actually goes over also the history of brooms. It's out in Barnes and Nobles, online, anywhere. We are not being
sponsored by Barnes and
yeah,
Noble.
this is not sponsored by the Wizarding World or Lumos or any of those organizations.
We're not sponsored by anyone. Please sponsor us. Sponsor us.
Sponsors JK. Wait, sponsor us JK Rowling, not that I'm joking.
Sponsor us. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. But yeah, so broomsticks are integral. It's an integral part of a wizarding sport called Quidditch. Quidditch is
Basically the sports ball of
Yeah.
the Wizarding World.
pretty much. It's fun. It's the only sport that I would ever consider watching. So yeah, it's Harry's favorite and actually best skill. It's Harry's favorite sport and best skill is Quidditch prowess.
If he actually had like a normal childhood and a normal like school life, he probably would have been a Quidditch player.
It would have been great.
It could have been a contender.
Exactly. So yeah, the artifacts make the world, which is good. That's a great part of world building. Finally, because it's quicker to talk about, I've saved my favorite for last. Let's talk about the magic system. The magic system in Harry
Which
Potter.
I'm going to freely admit I know little to nothing about, because it for me it's just, hey, say these words. Hey, this special thing happened. Magic.
Can you are you really close up to your mic, Wyatt?
Yeah.
All right, can you back off a little?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Is this better?
Yes. The magic system is, so most people, but I'll explain it for people who don't know. The magic system is typically divided up into two sort of concepts, and then it's sort of a standard of, a realm between. So a soft magic system is one that is not really described well. It can sort of feel like a MacGuffin depending on it. It could be like, oh yes, at this current, it's like if you have a wizard character and you're going through like a dungeon, or you're fighting like the big boss, or no, you're going through like a dungeon and you're fighting gnomes or whatever, and you're pulling fireballs and you're breaking, and all that, and then you go up to a door and it's like, hey, why don't you use your magic to, open the door? And he's like, oh, I can't do that. It's strange, it's a strange and magical door or whatever. And then in the final fight between the big boss, he's the one that enchanted the door, so he has like a bunch of magic on himself, and the wizard pulls out like magical pocket sand, or he does this great feat.
Magical pocket sand, just pocket sand.
Yeah, exactly. It's just some great feat of magic, and then it's like, then it leaves you going, why didn't he use that on the door or anything like that? And or like, even, and the character might even say it if it's a funny movie, and they'll just be like, the mysteries of magic, so that's typically what it is. What a soft system is. A lot of people have described Lord of the Rings as having a soft magic system, which I would agree with. It does not really describe the magic system, which can be a boon sometimes. It really depends on how you build the world. And so
because you could actually, like, there's mystery to it, but it's like logical mystery to it.
Yeah, and it also depends, like, for example, in Lord of the Rings, the way they set up magic, it's more like an understanding, which is typically how magic's set up, but it's like the characters themselves don't really have magic. They would never say they did, really. It's sort of like the whole, what you call magic, or what we call magic, you call science, or vice versa.
But and that's a whole different podcast.
That's a whole different universe. But yeah, and so, for example, the Hobbits are like one of the least magical.
That's a different podcast, Mason. Let's get off of
yeah, you're right. So, well, I'm just saying. So it's a soft magic system. We'll talk about that later. It's a soft magic. There's a soft magic system. A hard magic system is one with very well-defined rules.
Very quantified.
Exactly. For example, I think this will explain my knowledge of or betray my knowledge of anime. But I think Full Metal Alchemist, they have a very defined rule of of magic is sort of a give and take. You get the exact value of what you give. And that's Full Metal Alchemist. That would be an example of a very hard magic system, because there's no really no liberties in it, no nothing. It follows these rules. Harry Potter is very kind of in between, but I'd say leads more to hard magic system. The reasoning being, so most wizards, how it sets it up is, number one, most wizards can't use magic without a wand. Now, it's not impossible, but you have to be powerful. You have to have some level of power, knowledge, or great skill, because what wands actually are sort of a siphon for your magic. In fact, it is said that anything could really be a siphon for magic. A tea kettle could be. So, it really, the wand itself isn't important. And so we see throughout the thing, and the book stays consistent with the magical, with, that magic system. Because, for example, we see Harry a lot of times you know, when he's was it separated from his wand, he'll try to summon his wand back to him, which he can do if he can summon stuff easily if he had his wand.
Well,
Always-
even before that, there was evidence of that with like when he was in school and such, in like Muggle school, I should say.
They explained that, and we can go over that in a second. But you know what it is that you know.
Oh, by the way, like quick pause, real quick.
Yeah.
We're running out of time.
We'll end shortly. I'm just trying to fill out a few things.
I got you. I was just like putting that out there.
Don't worry, I'm staring at it.
I got you.
But yeah, he give it a break real quick. He
Mason, you gotta edit this.
thank you for that. But yeah, so it stays consistent with the magic system of he can't you know, he's not at the skill level to be able to call his wand back to him. You know, it's never like, oh, and then suddenly when he needs it most, his wand flies back to his hand because magic was just so strong that day. No, you know, he doesn't know it. It won't work. That's an example of a harder magic system, which is somewhat what I think makes it so good. And then of course, I'm trying to think of another way. And of course, Dumbledore can easily do stuff like that because, you know, because he's got an extreme level of, you know, skill of magic, proficiency of magic.
I mean, with how Dumbledore is described as being like, you know, like what, 1,000-something years old?
He's 150.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He is 150 years old. And,
I'm so old.
I was thinking it was more like the Methuselah type of old, like at like, you know, 500 years old. He's just like a middle-aged man.
Dang, I mean, still though, that's like something. But yeah, why was also go on.
But what I'm saying is, like, you know, Dumbledore was a 150-year-old man. What's his name? Harry Potter.
Was like,
yeah. What's his name? What's that one obscure character, like Potter or something?
Harry Potter.
Harry Potter. It sounds like a really bad knockoff. Harry Potter. But Dumbledore was a 150-year-old man, and Harry Potter was 19. There was going to be an obvious difference between their skill sets.
Yeah, cut him some slack. Wyatt also brushed up on something. So, when wizarding children are born, they often, when they kind of bloom into their powers, which can happen at a very young age, they often do just that. They bloom. Sometimes their magic, you know, will show itself or manifest itself in different things. And now normally this would kind of break that hard magic system. It would be like, wait, what? So you know, they can just use, so as you get, you know, they can use magic when they're young for what purpose or whatever, you know, but the way it is explained makes a lot of sense. Magic in and of itself is a raw sort of type of energy. It's why Obscurus exists, or Obscuri, whatever it is, the plural form of Obscurus.
It's like platypus, platypi, cactus, cacti.
Exactly. So it's those weird eyes, which I don't say.
The ooses and ices.
Yeah, exactly.
Isis.
Yeah, Isis. But yeah.
Harry Potter and Isis.
The unlikely couple. But yeah, it's a
you just see Harry Potter like with the turban on, just
well, didn't Quirrell wear a turban?
He very well much did.
All right. Anyway. Oh, I don't want to go down that path.
Harry Potter myth unconfirmed.
Why? I don't want to die. Let's not go down this path. Sorry. That in and of itself might have been a little offensive.
Jokes.
Anyway,
all jokes.
Yeah, all jokes. I love everybody. Wait, anyway.
We all love everyone.
Children are able to manifest magic just because they're not so much as able to control it as it just sort of happens. And so as they get older and they get more in charge of their powers, that tends to happen less and less, which is why now it requires, whereas first it was raw energy just going, now it's more mature. And so now it typically gets called upon rather than just happens. And so it doesn't break the hard magic system. It just doesn't, it flows parallel to it. But it still would be considered by most standards a hard magic system because there's just certain stuff that you aren't able to do. Like, I'm trying to think of one good one. Oh, they even have certain laws. Like, I forget exactly the name of the one, but the law is that you cannot create food out of thin air. You can't just create food. But if you know where to find it, you can conjure it up wherever you're at, or you can, pull it to you. And so, and you know what? They keep to this law, and for some reason they really love this law because they keep to it and talk about it throughout a lot of the books. For some reason, especially in the Deathly Hallows, which makes sense, but I don't know, they just really love talking about that law. But yeah, you can't just conjure food, which, that's a demonstration of just how hard the magic system is. And of course, there are some liberties that are taken. For example, flying. It's established. So first off, in the first book, Hagrid, when he comes to pick up Harry, he says he flies over the lake. Now, the problem with this is that it is then later said that no wizard has ever, in fact, it's even said this in outside the Harry Potter books, but in still canonical sources, like Quidditch Through the Ages book. It said that no wizard has ever found a way to fly.
Maybe it was just Hagrid like colloquializing like what's it called, the basically the wizard version of teleportation.
It would be, but then wouldn't he just say I apparated?
Yeah, apparated. Well, Harry Potter would have no idea what apparition is.
Still though, Hagrid doesn't look like he puts that all into account. It's more, obviously, this doesn't really say anything about Hagrid. It was the first book, so she probably didn't think all that through about it. It was still, the first book was very much made to be a kid's book.
And she may very well have much been thinking like, oh, I'm probably just going to put this one book out and not put any more out.
Well, yeah, because children's books typically didn't do well in those day and age. But then as it went on, it was obvious, flying can do a lot of MacGuffin work. And she actually tried very well to keep the MacGuffins either hidden or not easily anticipated. And so she made that rule, which then made it, everyone followed that rule that you can't fly unaided. And then she kind of made it to where Voldemort and his Death Eaters could do just that. But the reason
that's true, they were just kind of floating around, weren't they?
The reason why it's not made like why nobody really, people will still do because people are like that, but nobody really calls it out like, oh, he this breaks the hard magic system, is because it's sort of played as a part of Voldemort's just unworldly power and just great, sort of his greatness, things like that. But in all actuality, it does not really make that much sense, all things considered, with the magic system, and it does kind of lessen the effect. So sort of what the magic system becomes is, well, yeah, most things can't happen unless you're really powerful. Then they can't happen. Then you can do anything.
You can do anything with a lot of power.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the magic system.
That's the moral of the story with Harry Potter is you can do anything if you have enough power.
Well, yeah, so pretty much the magic system is with enough power, anything can be done. And so, yeah. So to end this off on a note, Harry Potter, again, is very good. I know we pretty much spoiled a lot of plot points, but it is still worth, if you haven't already read it, it's still worth reading. And if you have already read it, it's worth rereading.
Because we've left out a lot of information.
A lot of characters, a lot of information. It is all very, very good. And I'd even say Fantastic Beasts, though a lot of people might not like it, is probably my favorite Wizarding World movie. Harry Potter, the books will always be great.
But if we were to just go over every little interesting detail about the Harry Potter universe, we'd be here for hours.
So if you want more explanations about things or more explanations on it, then let us know in the comments. or an email if this is only on Spotify, which it won't be. But
If you have any interesting ideas or any interesting
fiction worlds you want us to take a look at,
we'll definitely consider it. We'll definitely try to
do it. And don't worry, in the coming podcast, we will talk about more. We'll go more in depth with these things because we'll try to make different parts. We'll try to dedicate months to them because this will come out weekly. So we'll dedicate a month to each fictional world to try to get a more in-depth look at it. Today was sort of just, as a first episode, it was sort of just a sort of just around the ball, I'm trying to really think of the word, a general glance. It was more of just a general look at what makes this world so enticing to readers and onlookers and stuff like that, to viewers. And so, but don't worry, in coming videos we will go a lot more in depth. To end this off, I want to hear, Wyatt, what is your favorite thing about the Harry Potter books or the Wizarding World in general?
Dobby.
Dobby is great. And again, for all of you who are at home like, you didn't go over Dobby, that's because
we're saving an entire podcast
exactly.
episode for
Well,
Dobby.
we can't do Dobby justice in this single episode, so it's better
Absolutely.
to read about Dobby. This
is more or less just context for Dobby, not the podcast for Dobby himself.
This is actually, we might call this the Dobby cast.
This is the Dobby cast. It's just a prequel, and this one specific episode is just a prequel to all the very lengthy series that we're going to be doing on Dobby.
Dobby, an in-depth look at Dobby. My favorite thing is probably of the Wizarding World in general, and it's gotta be the wand lore. Wands are just so interesting. I always love enchanted things because it's always like, especially ones that are said to be semi-sentient, because it's always just so. It's one of those things that kind of break the hard magic system. Because I'm a fan of softer magic systems. I like it soft, but wands are probably my favorite thing about it, but not as great as Dobby. All right. So
Not rarely. No, I wouldn't even say rarely. Just nothing can compare to Dobby.
Yeah. So this has been Chilled Sages. That's right, Chilled Sages. Not like the tea, but pretty close to it. I have been I have been your host, Mason, aka Mace Chill.
Your co-host, Wyatt Ross.
And we will see you next time. Well, that was a good video, right? I hope so. Anyway, if you liked it, well, then you know what they say. Like, comment, and subscribe. Click on any one of the cards on the screen to either subscribe, or, if you've already done that, click on to see another video. I'm pretty sure in that little eye circle, don't exactly know what it's called, you'll find more videos, probably a playlist of sorts. And until next time, I've been your host. Chill out.